Alright guys, I've been wanting to do this for a while since I got this bike. It of course is a 2015 BMW R1200R. This is the liquid cooled. This was the first year that they used this engine in this bike. Of course it was previously used in the R1200 GS, and I believe in 2014 the R1200 RT. I chose this bike after owning a Triumph Street Triple. Prior to that, I owned a Triumph Sprint ST 1050, and I was looking sort of for a mixture of the two. I purchased this bike as a demo. It had about 3,000 miles on it when I purchased it. It currently has about 9,000 miles. I've owned the bike for about 3.5 months. I've been riding it quite a bit. I'm basically just going to go over some of the things that I really like and some of the things that I really dislike about the bike. We'll just take it from there. Going to start with the things I don't like, and we'll start at the front of the bike. First of all, the suspension was something that really drew me to this bike. It is the D-ESA, the Dynamic Electronic Suspension Adjustment, as you can tell by the gold forks. This is sort of a lackluster component. You know, having ridden the Street Triple R, you know, it had outstanding suspension, stock. It had great brakes. This has very good brakes, although they are a little bit progressive. You know, they take quite a while. You know, the lever, you typically don't pick up the brake until about there, which is sort of a bit of travel. It's nice, it's luxurious, but it's not quite the most aggressive braking setup. Again, the front suspension, it has two modes. There is road mode, which is a softer mode that also electronically adjusts as you ride, and there is a dynamic mode, which is more stiff and typically used for canyon carving and that sort of thing. The dynamic mode is definitely noticeably different. The road mode is relatively soft, but a lot more comfortable around town. Neither one of them are perfect. And something that, you know, it really bums me out about the digital, you know, electronic suspension adjustment is that you can't fine tune it yourself. You're just kind of hands off. So I typically leave it in road mode. I feel like I have a lot more grip in road mode, especially when cornering aggressively. You know, the suspension isn't as stiff, but it tracks the ground a little bit better. Dynamic mode, typically for me at about 180 pounds, is a little bit too stiff. It's just a little bit too hard. If the road surface is really nice, it will work just fine. But you know, typically around town, you're not going to be using that very much. Second thing I'll mention about the forks is that from the day that I got this bike, you can take a look and you can see it right there. And you can see it right there a little bit more. These forks have leaked. Now some may say that this isn't really a real leak. You know, I've read a lot in the forums, a lot on Facebook. I've even spoken to BMW directly, and they say, yeah, well, you know, the forks, they release a little bit of oil onto the fork tubes. You know, having owned 10 different motorcycles, I can tell you that I have never seen a fork leak oil like that, you know, unless the fork seals were bad. BMW has actually agreed to replace my fork seals under warranty, which is great because, you know, I don't think they should be doing that. But, you know, besides that, I think that's the nature of the whole front end here as far as the front suspension goes. Next complaint on the list, I will say, has to do with the headlight assembly. Not necessarily the headlight itself. It's extremely bright. There is a set of LEDs here, a set of LEDs here, there's a bulb here, and there's a bulb here. let's say after about 1,000 miles of riding it, I did burn out the low beam light. You know, at 4,000 miles at that point, I think it's probably a little bit early to be burning out a headlight. I don't know if this has to do with the vibration that occurs here or what. Second to that, I would say that this large headlight aperture, it is glass, and while that looks nice, and I'm sure the optic quality is up to BMW's excellent standards, I did get a chip in the headlight right here. You can see it's right here after about 2,000 miles. And now we'll move on to some of the other things that are a little bit odd about this bike. I will say that the dash readout that BMW provides, although it is cute looking, well, I don't have my key here, but the readout is generally a little bit, I don't know, I feel like they could have done a better job. This section, of course, the speedometer, is very hard to read. This, of course, is a bike in America, so these are mile per hour here with kilometers per hour on the inside. It's difficult to read that when you're moving. Of course, there's a way to set up the computer to read the miles per hour, but, you know, wish you didn't have to do that. I, of course, have fitted the Puig, I believe that this is their sport screen. It's a lot larger than the largest BMW screen that they offer stock. It's mounted to the BMW bracket. Just a quick aside about this part here. It looks great. I really like the way that looks. It works quite well. I'm about 5'7". That's ideal for me. However, the mounting points, you can see that that screw is a little bit cockeyed in there. For whatever reason, Puig just did not engineer this to have flat mounting surfaces here, so the screws sit a little bit haywire. Not a big deal, but it was a pain in the ass while mounting it. We'll move on to the engine here. Not a lot of bad to say about the motor. I have to say it is a terrific power plant. Basically, the main reason I bought this bike was the engine. You know, they say it makes about 125 horsepower and about 100 foot-pounds of torque. I'm betting that's more like 100 horsepower at the wheel and perhaps about 75, 80 foot-pounds of torque at the wheel. It's got a lot of go. It really has a lot of power down low, a lot of torque, but it's very easy to manage. You know, you get into the throttle, it's not incredibly twitchy. If you've ridden anything like a Ducati, Monster 1100, the 1200s, the Multistradas, very twitchy throttles, very, very smooth throttle on this bike. However, I will say there's one major component that throws me off about this machine, and it's the fact that at very low throttle input, so say, you know, about this, when you're cruising, say you're cruising around town at about 25, 30 miles an hour, you know, you're in second or third gear, the bike is very luggy. It surges, and you know, all I can figure is that this is just due to the emission controls that have been, I mean, you can see the size of the muffler there. The emission controls, I think it's a lean surge. I believe the bike surges a bit at those low revs because it runs lean at that. You know, there's, you know, for whatever reason, however they tuned this bike, you know, it's an annoyance. It took some getting used to, coming from a bike as smooth as a Triumph Street Triple, which has, of course, the inline 3-cylinder, and it's buttery smooth. Besides that, I mean, the engine's outstanding. There's a bit of a flat spot right around, let's say 6,000, you know, 5,000, 6,000 RPMs. There is about a, you know, maybe a 500 RPM range flat spot. Again, probably due to emission controls. That's all I can figure. Besides that, I mean, it's an outstanding motor. It'll pull strong, minus that flat spot, all the way from idle, you know, straight up to, you know, 125, 130 miles an hour, no problem. I have toured with this bike at great length thus far, and it does really great on the highway. got a lot of power, you know, 70, 80 miles an hour. You're sitting right about midway up the rev range, which is outstanding. Only other thing to note about the engine is it's somewhat noisy. The motor is a bit noisy, and I believe this is just related to the higher compression. I believe this engine is 12.5/1 compression. You hear a lot of valve train noise, a lot of ticking. It's, you know, it's somewhat unnerving. You know, when I first bought the motorcycle, it was a little bit concerning to hear that, but you know, I've understood that it's totally normal. Of course, when you start the bike up from a cold start, you get a little bit of cam chain rattle. I actually remedied this by using a Bosch 3330 oil filter, and there it is. That one has a flowback valve. You know, I don't know how many others do. I'm sure a lot of oil filters do, but that actually helped keep more oil in the engine, and it reduced that cam chain rattle at startup. Let's see. We'll go back here to the foot, to the controls, the foot controls. This is a comfortable bike. You sort of sit in this motorcycle. You sit down inside of it. The pegs are relatively low. It is a comfortable riding position, but I will say that the riding position does become uncomfortable the moment you want to ride this bike aggressively. If you are somebody who likes to ride a lot of twisty roads, in order to get up on your haunches, you know, and put the weight onto your legs, it's a little bit difficult. Not to mention these pegs are actually, they have a rubber thing here that shifts around a lot when you're rolling on the pegs. If you stuff your foot in there and you're pushing into a corner, you know, at that point the stock seat feels quite low. I would actually venture to say that if you were going to spend a lot of time riding this bike in the canyons, I would invest in the sport seat, which I believe comes on the RS. It's about, you know, let's say it's 1.5 inches or so taller, and it's more narrow. I think I will probably eventually end up buying that seat. I think it's just a little bit more comfortable when it comes to actually riding the bike in the twisty roads. But beyond that, the controls are very comfortable. The levers are extremely nice. Switch gear is very nice, you know, typical BMW quality. I wonder how it will wear over time, but it does work quite well. The heated grips are an outstanding feature. They have 2 modes. One is warm and the other is extremely hot. So that's only for the coldest months. Rear suspension seems pretty compliant to me. The paralever, BMW paralever swing arm, of course, known to try to control the jacking that you experience on a single-sided swing arm bike, still jacks on me. You know, it still gets still a bit harsh over bumps at times, but, you know, not the worst thing in the world. You know, like I said, I think time will tell on how how this bike stacks up over time and how it wears. But of course, these are known for being high mileage machines. This, of course, is the keyless version, so no key here, no key here to actually turn the bike on. It's a novel idea. I sort of wish that this was just a keyed bike, because I would say, you know, the moment that battery goes in your little key fob, you're in trouble if you're out on the road. I guess my biggest gripe about the whole machine, I would have to say, besides the leaking fork seals, is the transmission. And I understand that they have fixed this transmission in the 2017 and on, but this transmission feels like a Harley Davidson. It feels like a tractor, very uncivilized. You know, going from neutral to first gear feels like a bomb's going off. You know, the first time I did it, I thought I broke the bike. Once you're underway, once you're, you know, let's say between third and sixth gear, up and down, that is pretty smooth. 1 to 3, very agricultural, as they say. This bike, of course, does have the quick shifter and auto blipper installed. It's an outstanding feature, but again, it's not the smoothest in the first 3 ratios. Beyond that, if you're moving at speed, it is seamless, shifting from third to fourth to fifth to sixth. and back down. 1 to 3, again, pretty clunky, but I guess typical BMW. From what I understand, the pillion seat is an extremely comfortable ride. This, of course, has the luggage bridge that I use quite regularly with the BMW Soft Bag 2, I think is what it's called. I did take off the luggage grid. I haven't mounted the hard luggage yet. I do intend to put it back on there when I load that up. But beyond that, I will say this is a really, really, really versatile machine. It's sort of the do-anything boxer. It is the lightest boxer of them all at about 500 pounds, fully fueled with oil in it. And it does handle like a sport bike if you want it to. If you want to take a long cruise, if you really want to go on a long tour, put a windshield on it and you can do it. It's just as capable as the R1200RT or even the R1200 GS, as of course it is essentially the same platform. Beyond that, you know, little things here and there that I would change about it. The bars are comfortable, but they're a little bit too, there's a little bit too much pullback, if you can see that. I don't, maybe this is just my opinion. I wish the bar was a little bit straighter and didn't come back so far. Maybe for some people, taller riders, perhaps it's a little more comfortable, but for me, I do get some fatigue in the wrist after a few hours. I guess that's about it. Cleaning the bike is a huge pain in the ass. A lot of nook and crannies on this thing that are really hard to get to. But I guess that's, if you like to wash your bike, you know, you have fun with that. The exhausts have become this really nice blue. It's starting to get dark here, but that looks really cool. Stock exhaust sounds really good in my opinion. It's just the right amount of noise. However, it is very large and it is very heavy, so I will probably be removing that and putting something aftermarket on it at some point. I guess my only other complaint would probably be that the North American bike comes with these large incandescent floppy turn signals. Our regulations, from what I understand, require a certain size bulb. Europe gets the little sleek looking LED strip. I would love to have those on this bike, but considering it's a BMW, I'm sure they're about $400 or so. Yeah, that's about it. Fuel capacity, we're right about 5.5 gallons, I believe. I get about 220 miles to a tank, sometimes more, sometimes a little less, depending on how hard I'm riding it. But yeah, it's generally a very, very capable machine. This one, of course, as the sun sets on it, is in Cordoba Blue, which absolutely is my favorite color that this bike was available in. Unfortunately, it's no longer available in this color, but if you can find a 2015, it can be yours. All right, ask me any questions in the comments, be happy to answer. I just wanted to get a little review of this bike out there because there's very few honest reviews of the R1200R liquid cooled.